Okay, I think we can start. So, today we are going to explore JavaScript in the browser. So, we are going to basically mix what we learned in the last week about HTML, CSS, and the Bootstrap framework together with what we saw in the previous weeks in which we learned how to use JavaScript as a programming language. So, we are going to introduce some dynamic behavior in the hard-coded HTML page that you developed last week with Professor De Russis. Again, as you can see, I'm not Professor De Russis, so even this week I'm here to substitute him. I think that we can start. So this is basically the outline of what we're going to discuss today. So we're going to discuss how to load JavaScript in the browser. We are going to discuss two big everything is still working, okay? These events are created by you and managed by you, so you have to handle them. And you can also ignore events, so you can decide that a specific event, you don't want to manage it at all. So you can decide that when the user clicks on a certain button, you don't want to manage that click. So you can specify, please ignore this kind of event. But we discussed many times, I guess, so far, that JavaScript is a single-thread programming language. So how can we manage this asynchronicity? We did not go too deep in the last week. Even when we discussed about callbacks, we do not discuss how JavaScript handle this asynchronicity. We will do it a bit today without going too deeper in how the JavaScript engine is designed, but it is important that you have an idea of how this asynchronicity is managed. And basically, the events, or the events handlers function, are queued on this object that we call message queue or callback queue. And this message queue is managed only when the main thread is idle. So basically, when the main program is not working, we can manage the events. So let's see a schema and let's discuss it a bit, okay? This is the JavaScript engine, okay? That could be, I don't know, V8 for Chrome or Node.js or SpiderMonkey for Mozilla or JavaScript Core for Apple. So, I mean, whatever engine you want. The engine there's two main objects that are, I would say, mandatory. And if you did any other, course like, I don't know, algorithm and programming or stuff like that, probably this stuff is not new for you at all. You have a memory heap, which is a data structure that contains all the declared variable. And you have a call stack, in which all the functions are stored at execution time, okay? So basically, when you execute a piece of code, I don't know, you have the definition of several functions, and then you have the main that call function 1, function 2. They are put in the stack. So here you have function 1, here you have function 2, here you have function 3. All the functions are stored inside the stack. And when the execution is resolved, you took this function inside the processor, I would say. You manage this function, and then this function is removed by the stack. And then you move with the second one, with the third one, until the stack is empty. So this is basically how traditional stack works. And there are some components which are not part of the basic JavaScript engine, I would say. And for instance, among them, you have all the methods for manipulating the DOM, because, for instance, if you think about Node.js, inside Node, you do not have a document object model because you are not inside the browser. So the DOM API are some APIs which are outside the plain JavaScript engine. And you have also the setTimeout function, which is a function that, if I correctly remember, we discussed together when we talk about callbacks. But probably I did not go too deeper to discuss that function, which is a bit peculiar, because if you developed something on other programming languages, maybe to, I would say, to waste time, you are used to the sleep function, right? Everybody knows this function? Okay, basically, it's just a function that waits some time. You specify, I want to wait 3 seconds. The processor is stopped for this amount of time. Indeed, in some programming language, this function are particularly critical because they stop all the threads or all the processes because they take the control on the CPU. And then the execution resumed. Well, here we never saw a sleep function, right? You never seen something about sleep in JavaScript? No, okay. is also this stuff that before I show you that, for instance, I wrote window dot, I don't know, document, window dot history. The window object could be omitted. So you can just write history, and the browser automatically understands that you mean window.history. That's it. OK, and then obviously we have the DOM, the document, which is the HTML page that we are going to discuss in a couple of minutes. So these are some properties associated to the window object. For instance, this maybe could be a bit surprising for you, but console is an object associated to the window. So for instance, if you can write console.log something, or you can even write window.console.log.something, and they work in the same way. And this, considering that the BOM is not standardized, that means that this is a, I would say, surprising coincidence that all the browser developers and even no developers agree to use this syntax for logging. But for instance, if in the newer version of Node, they decide that they do not want to use console.log anymore, but they want to use print, I don't know, you will be forced to write different logging sentences in the browser or in the backend, for instance. So this is just a nice coincidence. And it has sense that the console is associated to the window object and not, for instance, to the DOM, to the document object. Because if you think about it, the console is something that is outside the HTML page. It's something you have to access a specific panel to have access on it. So remember that the console is not associated to the document object. Then obviously we have the document object, the history that I spoiled you before, but probably is not something surprising to you, I guess, because if you surf the web in the last, I don't know, 20 years, you observe this object. I mean, not directly, but I hope that everybody of you is aware that using the arrow, you can go back to the previous page that you surfed before. And we have also these objects that are quite peculiar, that are the local storage and the session storage, that are two objects that allow you to store a bit of data, not a bit, exactly a bit, but a bunch of data, not a great amount of data, inside the browser. And right now, we are not going to discuss how local storage and session storage work, but they are extremely important to manage authentication mechanism. So we are going to have a look on them, I don't know, maybe the last week of the course or the week before, when we implement an authentication mechanism inside the web page, when we complete front end, back end, and everything. OK, and finally, let's discuss the document object model. Again, the document object model, as you can guess, is huge. We observed last week how it's complex to manage an HTML page, how many tags, how many stuff you have inside it. And obviously, manipulate the DOM dynamically is still more complex than write a plain HTML page. So we will try to focus on the main DOM concepts. But we left to you this link, which is a very complex and complete tutorial about how on the CSS. So you can use all the syntax that you already saw for addressing something in CSS. You can use it there. You have this peculiar method that execute the CSS query, I would say, and return only the first element that that query returns, while with this other one, you have them all. A question that usually is raised in this moment is, what is the difference between the first three and the last two? Basically, these two methods are more recent, but you can use whatever method you prefer according to the situation. I mean, if you have an ID and you want to have access to a very specific tag, I suggest you to use the first one. It's the easier one. While if you want to execute some complex query, maybe using the CSS could be useful. Okay, obviously, when you have access to an element, I mean, how can I explain you? You have the document object, okay? We are discussing the fact that we are executing these queries on the DOM. Okay, so DOM, the document is the root of the tree that we said before. So basically, when you have access to document, it's like being here. So if you execute document.getElementById, you have access to this whole tree. If, I don't know, using document.getElementById, you obtain, I don't know, the table, this element, then on that node, if you want, you can re-execute the query. So you can say, let's suppose that we call the reference to the table, I don't know, table node. Then you can write something like table node.getElementById, and addresses something that is inside only this part of the tree. So all these methods are accessible from the document object to all his descendants, which is something that is basically written here. Okay, you have main, document getElementById main, and then on the main you execute getElements by tag name p to obtain all the paragraphs inside the main. Obviously, all these nodes are printable. So again, you can, if you want, have a look on the console on what you get. I don't know, you can write document getElementById foo. When you have foo, you can print it on screen to have a look of what is going on. And here you have a quick example of how you can use this difference query. Okay, so here you are addressing this ID. Here you're using query selector sharp foo, which is basically exactly the same behavior of the previous one, because if you remember the sharp address an ID. And you have, for instance, query selector all bold to obtain this class, this div, which has class bold, and this other div, which has class bold. And you can, if you see the last one, it addresses specifically all the elements okay, as I already said, the appearance may vary according to the browser. So we can try to solve these using CSS. For instance, if you apply the Bootstrap framework, you will observe that the components are more or less equal on every browser, but it's not 100% guarantee. So we will try to do our best, but here you can see that they are sometimes slightly different even using CSS. Obviously, okay, as I already said, there are some libraries and framework to handle this kind of stuff, and for sure we are going to use Bootstrap in this course, but you can use whatever library you want when you develop in your real life. Okay, form events, just a couple of slides. There are some events specifically of the form that you can manage. For instance, it is very curious that you have this set of events which are cut, copy, and paste that allow you to intercept when a user is trying to cut some text or to paste some text in a text area, which is something that probably you already observe navigating. For instance, when you have to write 2 times your password in a registration forms, it is very common that if you try to paste the password a second times, you will get something like you cannot paste here, or you just press Ctrl V and you observe that nothing happens. Is because there is this event which is intercepted. And you can check, okay, an input is changed. We are going, for instance, to use this event when we will implement the page using React. There is also something about the focus. Okay, an element has the focus to something, or an element lose the focus, which is something, again, when you are, for instance, inserting a password, you move the cursor on another point of the page and you will see an error, like, for instance, the password does not match our policy or stuff like that. And here you have the example that, for instance, you have this form with type text and input type submit. Again, we suggest you to use button, but just an example. You obtain the input field using document.querySelector input of type text. Then you add this even listener that print on the console the current entered value is. So you see you are waiting for input. So every time that you hit a button, this even listener is triggered and the new value is printed on the console. Or you have also this even listener change that observe, okay, the value is changed since last time. You see they are quite similar event associated to the same object. They are probably triggered both when you try to insert something on the text area. Okay, as I already partially spoiled you before, the form by default is submitted. When you want to do different stuff, you can prevent this default behavior, so a new page is not loaded. And I mean, this is especially important for us because we want to implement a single page application. You know, we discussed it in this course. We are going to address this kind of behavior. So we don't want that when we submit the form, we go to a different page. We want that the JavaScript handle this stuff, interact with the backend and stuff like that. Okay, you have the reference. We reached the end of this theoretical part. Do you have any kind of question that you want to discuss now? Okay, I assume that the answer is no. We are too tired, we need coffee. Okay, you're right. So I guess that we can have a 15-20 minutes break, and then in the second hour, we are going to implement this stuff. So we are going to observe a bit of dynamic behavior of JavaScript.